Welcome back everyone. It's been a while and I've been really busy with work, and I'm trying to be more consistent with making more YouTube videos, and let's hope I get more time to do this kind of stuff. But anyways, we have a very interesting thing today. We are going to be creating another very interesting motion graphics effect inside of Maya and using a little bit of Mesh. So let's see. First of all, let's start off by taking a plane, and this thing is going to be a completely procedural effect. Now you can try this with different kinds of ideas and shapes. It totally depends on what kind of direction you want to take your motion graphics on. So it totally depends on the idea. Now I'm going to start off by taking a simple geometry and simple scene, but you can implement this same technique on other things as well. So I'm going to start off by a simple plane, or maybe not. You can start off by taking a simple dummy object. So I'm going to take something like maybe something like this, or let's take something flat, like maybe like a platonic. And I'm just trying to be checking out different kinds of primitives. As I said, this is completely a creative process, so I'm not planning anything on this. And I'm going to select this disk and I'm going to go to my polygons. I think this is looking quite good shape, and instead of circle I'm going to change this to triangles. Now from here you can kind of start off by kind of modifying your primitive. Now here, as you can see, we have a simple triangle. You can also choose quads, or you can also choose pies, and totally depends on you. I'm going to go with triangle, and as you can see we have 3 sides. You can increase this sides, number of sides. I'm going to keep it at 3, and as you can see we have subdivisions of 3. I'm going to decrease this subdivision level to 1. Okay, and from here I'm just going to modify this, maybe like extrude this inside, and extruding this a little bit upwards, and maybe beveling this. All right, if you don't have bevel, you can simply click on this icon, or you can also go to edit mesh and bevel. Now I'm going to do the same with this one, and I'm just here randomizing stuff. I mean, you can totally randomize it completely on your own, and I think this is looking quite good. I don't think I have to do for this one, but all right, let's do it anyways. Okay, so we have a decent looking geometry. Now I'm going to do one more thing, and that is selecting all the edges and extruding this downwards, and then simply going to edit mesh, and fill hole. That's it. That will just close our geometry. Now here, as you can see, we have a simple basic shape, and I'm going to call this try1. All right, so let's hit Ctrl D to duplicate this. Now the reason we are duplicating this, if we kind of match this, or you can say let me just make this a clone, and if I just duplicate this, as you can see, we can duplicate this a number of times, but there's always going to be a remaining space between each of these clones. Now to eliminate this space, what we are going to do is we are going to make another copy of this, bring this outside, and we can kind of like, or otherwise we can just rotate this here, and I'm just going to rotate it something like this. Let's move it outside just a little bit more, and I think this is perfect. I'm going to switch to my top view, and let's zoom in, hit 4, so you can view this in wireframe, and I'm just going to adjust this perfectly. All right, so I think that is good enough. Okay, so I think this is looking good. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to select this, and from here you can kind of do, what you can do is either clone this, or you can make it a group, but the best thing to do is basically combining them together. But before doing that, it's important to shade them, because after you combine them, you cannot shade them individually. You have to do a lot of work with you. You have to select the individual faces and shade them separately. So it's better to color them. So let's select this, and I'm going to apply a new standard material, stand surface, and let's call this try1. I'm going to make the weight to 1, and let's create a new material for this, stand surface, try2, and yeah, perfect. So anyways, now let's go to the color and let's change the color. So let's select a perfect color for this, and now I'm going to go to my color, and I have some colors going on. I'm going to select kind of like this color for this, and for this one I'm going to select a little bit of light color, and I think this is looking good. And for the faces, what I'm going to do is select some faces of this, maybe top 2 faces, and maybe apply a new standard material onto this, and I'm going to call this dry face, and let's make the weight 1, and the color will be something like this. I'm going to do the same with this. Let's select this one, and maybe this one, and let's apply a new material onto this, and let's call this dry face 2. Let's make the weight 1 and apply the color to something like this. Okay, now before jumping into other stuff, let's make the material a little bit of flat. So I'm going to make this 0.1 and this will be 0.5. I'm going to do the same 0.5, 0.1. Let's do the same with this 0.1 and 0.5, just so we have a little bit of more roughness into this. And we can always tweak this. We don't have to settle with this. So let's move on. Now we have a decent amount of geometry going on. I'm going to go to mesh and combine this. All right, perfect. Now let's center pivot this. Good. Now I'm going to create a plane. Now what we are looking for is something to clone this geometry onto. Now for example, if we have a plane, we can clone this geometry onto this surface of this plane. Otherwise you can choose some other primitive as well. I'm going to go with plane, and let's turn off the grid. I think it's getting in the way. Now I'm going to select my mesh and just scale this down a little bit, yeah, and go to the mesh network and simply hit mesh. Now once you have created the mesh, as you can see, we have created a bunch of clones out of this. Now instead of distributing this on the, if you go to the distribute, now by default mesh does something called as distribute, which basically kind of moves your geometry onto the x-axis. Instead we are going to change the distribution type to mesh. Now what we are going to do is we are telling the mesh network to not to project our geometry, instead of linear, project it onto a different mesh. So I'm going to go to my outliner and select my plane and drop it on the input mesh, and that's it. Now before actually doing this, I'm going to call this floor, and let's select this and go to mesh again and distribute, and here as you can see we have mesh, and I'm going to drop this onto. If you can't select your floor, you have to middle mouse click on your floor and then you can drop it on your input mesh. So as you can see, we have bunch of clones going on our plane, but it's not actually filling our plane. So we can increase the number of points, but instead of doing this, and instead of experimenting with what number suits the best, what you can do is simply click on the flood mesh. But as you can see, we don't get that option. It's completely grayed out, and the reason is because the method has been set to scattered. Instead, what we want is face center. Now this way, what you'll see is, if you notice your plane, you have a number of subdivisions going on your plane, and if you go back to your plane and increase the subdivisions to something like 20 and 20, as you can see, it increases even more. Now the reason is the mesh network is detecting the number of faces there are on the plane, and it's kind of duplicating the amount of mesh, or you can say mesh network, onto that plane. So what we are going to do is go to the mesh network again, and in the distribute type, as you can see, we have the number set to 200. You can increase this or decrease this, and instead of doing this, you can simply click on flood mesh, and that will just fill your whole plane, which is completely I think it's perfect. So now we have a small problem, and the problem is we have a lots of gaps. Now to fix these gaps, either you can increase the number of subdivisions, you can go to your plane and you can increase the number of subdivisions, either you can also scale down your plane, which will kind of do the same thing. I think instead of scaling down and increasing the size of our geometry, what we can do is simply increase the number of subdivisions. All right, so now we have lots of geometry, Now let's see which value suits the best. So for this, I'm going to go to my top view, and here I can get a kind of clear look which is perfect. So I'm going to just decrease this, and I think 40, maybe 42. All right, we are close. 43. Okay, and for this I'm going to go with 43 as well. Okay, we have to increase on this one. 47, or maybe like 50. So 50 just closes it in, and I think 45 will do the same. And we have a small amount of gaps. Let's see, and I'm going to keep this to 44, and we have small amount of gaps, so I think 45 is perfect, and I think 52. Yeah, so we have small intersection going on. I think 51 will work fine. I think we have to go with 52. Perfect. So if we go to the perspective view now, as you can see, we have a completely flat design which is completely cloned onto the plane. Now, as I said, this is completely procedural. If you don't like the look, you can increase the subdivision on your plane or on your geometry as well. So now when it comes to creating an interesting motion graphics, we have to deal with, and as you can see, we have a lot of intersection going on. You cannot actually see your geometry that well, and don't worry about it, we are going to fix it soon. So let's click on your mesh first, and what we are going to do, as I said, we can't see our geometry that well because right now the plane and the geometry is kind of intersecting. That's why you see these grayed areas and the geometry as well. So what we do here, we have something called as push along normals, which you'll find in distribute. What I'm going to do is simply increase the value, and what this will do is simply move this move your mesh network, or you can see your geometry, a little bit higher. So you can use this, but I don't think we have to use it that much. So I'm going to go to my front view to see which is perfect for this, the value, and let's hit 4, or you can also click on this towards the wireframe, and I think 0.10. I think 0.10 works great, and it's kind of little bit intersected, but I want it that way, so it should be kind of inside the plane. Now let's animate this. Now to animate this, what you are going to do is go to the mesh network, and here I'm going to select a new node, which will be the offset node. Let's add on offset node. You can also do this from mesh editor. If you don't have the mesh editor, you just have to click on this icon, and there you go. So from here you can kind of add anything. Totally depends on your workflow. Now here I'm going to simply create a negative value for our network, and by that I mean I'm going to change the rotation to 180. Now as you can see, it has completely flipped the geometry over. Now this is what we want. We want to animate the geometry like it's completely on the opposite direction, and I'm going to also offset the direction of my Y value onto the negative value, so it looks like the mesh is kind of like over coming on the plane. So I'm going to choose a value of -1 maybe, and I think that's way too much. Yeah, so -0.1, that's what I was going for, and maybe that's too much. 50050, and I think we have to go for something like 3020. Okay, so 30 or otherwise 25 will work great. Yeah, so -0.25 works great on this. Yeah, as you can see. So let's go with that. Now as you can see, we have completely opposited on my mesh right now. The direction is opposite and the rotation is on the negative value as well. So now how do we use this to animate this? Now we are going to create a fall off out of this. Now if you go to the offset node, and here you'll see fall off object, which will kind of create a kind of fall off, or you can say a region where these geometry, or you can say these objects are affected. Now if I right click on this and click on create, as you can see, we get this kind of sphere going on, which is our fall off. As I said, we have a selected region. Now if I scale this down to something like this, as you can see, we see our plane, right? And we see all sorts of plane as well, but this is not exactly what we wanted. So I'm going to just increase this. Now let's get into the fall off. So double click on your fall off, and here you have a couple of options. You can change your fall off to be a cube if you want that kind of animation. Totally depends on you. You can also change the shape to NURBS curve, or you can say select your own particles or mesh. I'm going to set it to sphere, And as you can see, we have inner zone, and inner zone is kind of like the mostly affected part, and which is, as you can see, we have a small sphere and a larger sphere. So this is your inner zone and this is your outer zone. So I'm going to keep it that way. I don't think I have to change that, but if you do, you can simply change it from here. All right, so let's keep it. Now the next interesting thing that we have is the fall off ramp, and this is kind of the magic happening thing. Now here you have 2 points, your linear fall off. Now I'm going to change the linear fall off to smooth. All right, so as you can see, we have a kind of bezier look going on around our simple plane. I'm going to change this to smooth as well, but instead of making this a completely linear way, I'm going to change this to something maybe like this. All right, and as you can see, as I'm moving my object along, as you can see, I am kind of affecting the overall animation on this. So I can do one more thing. I can just bring this over here, or I can just play around randomly with my network on this ramp, and to get a different kind of result. So let's see over here, and let's keep it like that. That looks perfect. Now what I can do is simply animate this. Now right now, as you can see, I'm kind of erasing the overall animation on this, because as I move my sphere along, this is kind of like going on the negative value and making this geometry disappear. So instead, what we can do is simply invert the fall off, and it will do the negative effect. Now I can do, as you can see, if I increase the fall off, I'm getting that flippy kind of animation going on, and which is quite interesting. So let's give something interesting to this. The first thing we can do is set a keyframe on this to animate this. So I'm going to go to my first frame, and let's scale this way down, right? Something like, and I'm also going to change the inner zone. I think we have to change the inner zone to get a better interesting result. So let's see, I think 0.5 is good enough. Now let's scale this down to somewhere like this, where we don't see anything, and simply hit S to keyframe your fall off. Now what you can do is go forward in time and increase the fall off to something like this maybe, or you can make it complete if you want, and let's keep it like this and hit S again. Now if I go back and play this, as you can see, we have animated our fall off. By that we get a simple animation going on. Now to make this animation even interesting, what we can do is simply go to our offset, and we can kind of randomize the different kinds of rotation channels. So I'm going to hit a 90 on this to get, as you can see, as I change the value of the rotation, we get a different kinds of result. I think I'm going to keep it to 90. I think that looks good. And also change the value of the scale to something like -0.1, and I'll do the same on all the axes, and I think the value should be even higher. I think -4, -0.8. I think that's looking good. So let's copy this. Now this way, when my geometry are being cloned onto the plane, we can slowly see it gradually moving. Alright, so I think this is looking quite good now. We can also change, I don't think we should change the rotation axis on this, because if we do, then we have kind of intersection going on this side onto our plane. So let's zero this out, and from here, now from here it's completely creative process. So maybe the animation fall off is a bit too slow, but you can always change that. And I think this is looking good. Now we can simply go to the Arnold IPR, and now we have something like this. So let me just add a new material onto this, and stand surface, let's call this floor, and let's make this weight 1, and the color will be something like this. Okay, and I think I'm going to change this to 0.1, 0.5. Okay, let's go to the main cam, and I will zoom in where I don't see the effect that much. Let me just close this down. Okay, so I think this is looking good, and let's see now. Okay, so we have interesting animation going on. You can a little bit, I'm going to just change the overall color on, I think, on our floor. I think we should go with something like this. Yeah, so just to make our animation stand out even more. Okay, so have fun with this. I think it's a really nice and cool effect to play around with, and it opens dozens of new ideas for you to play around with. So definitely experiment with this and create an interesting result out of this. And if you do create something out of this, definitely send me on Instagram. I love to see all your work. And if you have any suggestion, let me know. If you have any doubts, please feel free to contact me. And again, thank you for watching. Enjoy.